Grace and peace, family. I'm Dr. Brandon McCrae, and welcome to another edition of Wisdom on Wednesday. We've been covering a subject entitled called The Heart of a Worshiper. Next week, we will examine in depth 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 5 through 15. But today, allow me to create some contextual groundwork so that we better understand our part by part a dissection of the verses that we will look and begin next week. When we look at the story of David and him inheriting the kingdom to which he was prophesied and promised, we'll start in 2 Samuel chapter 1. And what we realize and recognize in 2 Samuel chapter 1 is that David hears of Saul being executed, and the young man that brings the word to David then is executed by David because David has a reverence and respect for Saul as God's anointed. In chapter 1, we also see that David then begins to mourn both the death of his best friend on earth, Jonathan, and of his adversary, but God's anointed, Saul. In chapter 2, we see that David is anointed king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and Saul's son Ishbosheth is then made by Abner, Saul's a ruler of the army, the king. There we see a great battle at Gibeon also, where the two warring factions are in a joust, if you will. And Abner, the ruler of Saul's army, then murders Asahel, the brother of Joab. This will play a great part in chapter 3. As a matter of fact, in chapter 3, because of a dispute between Ishbosheth and Abner, Abner then makes a treaty here in chapter 3 with David, and the treaty with that army to give to him those tribes in the northern kingdom. David later meets with Abner, and Abner is later, after that meeting, killed by Joab as a blood watershed moment to reap the blood that Abner had spilled on the ground of Asahel, Joab's brother. But David mourns the life of Abner, knowing that Abner died unrighteously, and Abner, he himself, was a righteous man according to the scripture. In chapter 4, we see that Ishbosheth is then murdered by two sons of the tribe of Benjamin, and David avenges the murder of Ishbosheth. In chapter 5, David is anointed king over all of Israel. This is the united monarchy, both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And he's made the king there on Mount Hebron. He then takes Jerusalem back as his first kingly act, and he also defeats the Philistines at a place called Baal-perazim, or translated where we know the name God, a God of breakthrough. There in chapter 6, we reach the text that we will discuss and dissect next week. But the first act, after having received the kingdom and the city of David, or Zion, or Jerusalem, is when David goes back and he goes to get the Ark of the Covenant, because David says, I will not be king without the presence of the living God. Family, listen, next week we're going to discuss and dissect these verses that we've been building up to for this entire week, several weeks of a stretch. As we leave, I want you to take this note with you. True worship begins where love for one's self ends. This has been your boy Brandon McCrae, aka BmacMusik. Do 3 things for me: like, share, and comment on this post. We want to make something God go viral. And until next week, I want to see your face in the same space for Wisdom on Wednesday. Listen, holla at your boy.